Imagine this. You are standing on the edge of a vast canyon. Across the chasm lies a promised land, lush, green, and filled with the whispers of romance, companionship, and stability. People around you are shouting, "Jump! It's worth it!" You see men before you leap, their eyes wide with hope. But as they vanish into the mist below, you hear something else. The muffled screams of regret, the thud of bodies against invisible walls, the slow suffocation of once vibrant spirits. Marriage, as it is sold to men today, is that canyon jump. Promises paradise but hides its true cost in shadows. And here is the paradox. The very institution meant to bind love often becomes the silent executioner of a man's individuality. Carl Jung once wrote, "The greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents." When a man binds himself to marriage without profound self-awareness, he risks becoming not a partner, but a ghost, alive in body, dead in spirit. Think about how this is set up. Society teaches boys from an early age that their value is proven through providing, protecting, and sacrificing. That one day, they will become a man by settling down, buying a home, raising children, and making her happy. Yet, little is said about what happens to the inner life of a man when all his energy is directed outward, to serve roles, to fulfill obligations, to become an engine that runs for everyone else. The problem isn't love. The problem is the institutional structure of modern marriage, its legal, financial, and psychological mechanics, that no longer aligns with the realities of male selfhood. In its current form, it is less a sanctuary of intimacy and more a crucible where a man's time, autonomy, and dreams are melted down into fuel for a machine he does not control. But why does this matter so much for men in particular? Because men, more than women, are often conditioned to measure their worth not by who they are, but by what they provide. And marriage becomes the ultimate proving ground for this identity. The danger is that once this proving ground collapses, through divorce, infidelity, or simply the slow erosion of intimacy, the man realizes he has sacrificed his best years for an idea that was never truly his own. Picture the slow transformation. The ambitions you once chased with fire become impractical. Your free time shrinks into slivers between work and domestic duties. Your friendships wither, replaced by couple activities or isolation. And worst of all, you begin to forget who you were before the wedding vows. This is not the romantic tragedy of losing love. This is the existential tragedy of losing self. Nietzsche warned, "Many a man fails as an original thinker simply because his memory is too good." In marriage, this too good memory is the constant replaying of vows, promises, and obligations, often weaponized to keep a man in compliance, even when his inner life is collapsing. The vows become chains, and the chains become invisible because they are wrapped in the language of duty and love. You might say, but marriage has worked for centuries. True, yet the historical marriage contract was not about personal fulfillment. It was an economic and survival pact. Today, we've wrapped it in the expectation of lifelong passion and mutual growth, while keeping the same restrictive structure. It's a mismatch, a psychological double bind. The man who steps into this without radical self-knowledge risks becoming the archetype Jung feared. The man who plays a role for decades, never realizing that the role has consumed the actor. So the question is not, should you get married? The question is, are you prepared to sacrifice pieces of your soul for the version of marriage society offers you? And more unsettling still, what if that sacrifice isn't noble, but simply unnecessary? The journey forward will force us to dissect these illusions piece by piece. If we are to understand why men step willingly into an arrangement that so often erodes their freedom, we have to descend into the unconscious, into the world Carl Jung mapped with his theory of archetypes. It is not logic that pulls most men toward marriage. It is not even pure love. It is a collision between deep, inherited patterns in the psyche and the romantic myths we are raised on. You can tell a man all the divorce statistics you want, but if an ancient script is running in his mind, he will follow it, straight into the jaws of a fate he doesn't understand. Jung taught that the psyche contains primordial images, archetypes, that shape how we live, love, and suffer. For men, 3 of these are especially dangerous when it comes to marriage. First is the hero. This is the young man who believes his worth is proven by rescue. Saving the woman, building the home, shielding the family from the chaos of the world. Society praises him for this. Movies are built on this. Mothers tell their sons to be a good provider. But the shadow side of the hero is that he cannot exist without a battle to fight or a damsel to save. When there is no danger, he invents one. When his partner doesn't need rescuing, he feels useless. In marriage, this often turns into overfunctioning, working himself into exhaustion, making sacrifices that go unnoticed, and quietly resenting that his devotion is never enough. Then there is the lover. This archetype longs for union, beauty, and deep emotional connection. He dreams of the eternal flame, passion that will last forever. The lover is intoxicated by romance, but he is also easily blinded by it. He does not see the mundane realities of legal contracts, household politics, or the slow decay of desire. When the fire inevitably cools, he mistakes this for betrayal, not realizing it is simply human nature. The lover, without grounding in the self, will give up his boundaries to keep the fantasy alive, even as his individuality dissolves. Finally, there is the king, the ruler archetype who believes in order, legacy, and stability. The king marries to build an empire, a family dynasty, a name that will endure. He thrives on being the central pillar of his household. But when the legal and cultural climate turns against him, when divorce courts strip him of his resources, when his authority in his own home is undermined, the king experiences a psychic collapse. His kingdom falls, and with it, his sense of identity. What's dangerous is not these archetypes themselves. They are essential parts of the male psyche, but what happens when a man confuses an archetype with his entire self? He becomes possessed by it. He acts out the hero, the lover, or the king without conscious awareness, and in doing so, he walks right into the structural disadvantages that modern marriage imposes on him. Arthur Schopenhauer once observed, "Every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world." The man enthralled by an archetype believes his vision is reality. He cannot see beyond the script. He does not ask whether the institution he's entering has changed since the time those archetypes evolved. He does not realize that the cultural and legal framework that once supported these roles is gone, replaced by one that often penalizes men for living them. This is why cold facts and warnings rarely stop a man from marrying. You are not speaking to his rational mind. You are speaking to the unconscious forces that have shaped him since childhood. To break free, he would have to recognize the archetype at play, see its shadow, and integrate it into a more complete self. But most men never do. They think they are acting out of love or duty, when in truth they are being moved by something older, deeper, and far less forgiving. And here is the bitter irony. The very psychological patterns that give a man purpose and vitality are the same ones that, if left unchecked, led him into the most efficient trap society has ever devised. In the next section, we will strip away the romance entirely and look at the institutional mechanics, the legal, financial, and cultural architecture that turns this unconscious drive into a system of control. Because once you see the machinery, the illusion of choice begins to shatter. Once you strip away the poetic glow of vows, candlelit receptions, and the archetypal dreams that pull men forward, you are left with something far colder. A legal, financial, and cultural apparatus that operates with mechanical precision. It is not an accident that modern marriage looks the way it does. It has been engineered over centuries to bind men in ways that far exceed emotional commitment. Marriage, in most Western countries, is not merely a private agreement between two individuals. It is a legally enforceable contract with the state as its third and most powerful party. That piece of paper is a binding instrument that redefines your rights, your property, your obligations, and your future options. And while the romantic narrative tells you it's about love and partnership, the legal reality is about control, resource allocation, and liability. When a man marries, the state acquires the authority to determine the terms of his separation, financially, physically, and even with regard to his children. If the relationship collapses, he cannot simply walk away. He must navigate a legal labyrinth that often presumes him to be the more financially capable party, thus the one responsible for paying alimony, child support, and often covering the legal costs of his spouse. Let's be clear. These laws were originally designed in an era when women had little or no independent means of earning a living. They were a survival safeguard, but society has changed, and women now participate in the workforce at nearly equal rates. The laws, however, have lagged behind, frozen in a paradigm that assumes the man is always the provider and must bear the heavier cost when the union ends. The financial element is only one cog in the machine. The custody system often compounds the imbalance. Statistically, mothers are awarded primary custody in the vast majority of cases. This is not because fathers are less capable, but because of deep-seated cultural biases about caregiving roles. The result? A man who not only loses his partner but also loses daily access to his children, all while being legally obligated to fund their upbringing from a distance. From a psychological standpoint, this creates what Jung might call a shadow marriage, one in which the legal and financial bonds outlive the emotional ones. Even after the love has died, the man is still tethered to the structure, his life governed by the remnants of a decision he made years or decades earlier. And here lies one of the most overlooked truths. The man's role in marriage is not equal in risk. The potential rewards, companionship, shared growth, intimacy, are available in other arrangements without legally binding commitments. But the risks, financial ruin, loss of children, diminished autonomy, are magnified precisely because of the institutional overlay. Friedrich Nietzsche warned, "The surest way to corrupt a youth is to instruct him to hold in higher esteem those who think alike than those who think differently." Applied here, men are taught to value societal approval over individual discernment. The herd says marriage is noble, mature, the pinnacle of a man's life. Few stop to ask whether the herd is marching off a cliff. When the cultural script merges with the legal structure, you have a perfect storm. Unconscious archetypes driving the man forward, and a system waiting at the end of the aisle to bind him in ways he cannot fully imagine. And once bound, escaping is not a matter of personal will. It is a matter of navigating courts, lawyers, and judgments that may follow him for years, even decades. If this sounds cynical, it's because cynicism is simply clarity without the sugarcoating. The machinery of modern marriage is not concerned with your inner life, your dreams, or your personal evolution. It is concerned with enforceable obligations and the redistribution of resources. In the next section, we will explore the psychological decay that often follows once a man is inside this machine, the subtle erosion of individuality, the slow death of desire, and the quiet collapse of the self that Jung and others warned about. Once inside the machinery, the transformation rarely happens in a dramatic burst. There's no sudden crash, no single moment when a man wakes up to find his identity gone. Instead, it's a quiet, almost invisible process, a slow erosion that takes years, sometimes decades, to complete. First, it feels like compromise. You work longer hours for the family. You give up a hobby because time together matters more. You cut back on seeing friends because you're needed at home. These are reasonable sacrifices, or so they seem. But over time, the pattern becomes clear. You are subtracting pieces of yourself to keep the structure stable, and those pieces rarely grow back. Carl Jung observed, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." In marriage, many men never even get the chance. Instead of deepening self-knowledge, they are called to deepen their role. The man becomes the husband, and every other aspect of his identity is filtered through that title. The artist becomes the husband who paints. The athlete becomes the husband who runs marathons. The role becomes the anchor, and the man stops exploring the ocean of his own individuality. This role absorption is particularly dangerous because it feels virtuous. Society rewards it. Friends and family admire the dedicated husband who gives everything for his spouse and children. But what they do not see is that each act of self-erasure leaves the man less capable of bringing vitality into the relationship. You cannot pour from an empty cup, yet marriage often demands that the cup be drained daily. As the years pass, the emotional intimacy that once defined the union often begins to fade. This is not necessarily due to malice or neglect, but because desire is fundamentally incompatible with predictability. The lover archetype within a man craves mystery, novelty, and risk, but the structure of marriage rewards routine, safety, and stability. Over time, the fire cools. And here is the cruel twist. When that passion fades, it is almost always the man who is blamed. He is told he's not romantic enough, not communicative enough, not present enough. Meanwhile, the routines and responsibilities that were meant to secure love have quietly strangled it. For many men, this stage brings a subtle but relentless despair. They no longer recognize themselves in the mirror. Their dreams feel childish, their ambitions impractical, their friendships distant. The hero, the lover, and the king, all reduced to shadows of their former vitality. Aldous Huxley once wrote, "Most human beings have an almost infinite capacity for taking things for granted. This is the silent engine of marital decay. The man is taken for granted not out of cruelty, but because his sacrifices are invisible. He has built a world so functional that no one sees the cost." The tragedy is that this erosion is not inevitable in human relationships. It is a product of the way the institution is structured. By combining the demands of emotional partnership with the rigid, legal, and financial obligations of marriage, the man is locked into a system where the easiest way to keep peace is to keep shrinking himself. And because the rewards, companionship, stability, family, are deeply human needs, he accepts the trade without questioning if there's another way to meet them. Over time, resignation replaces resentment. The man convinces himself that this is simply maturity or real life. In truth, it is adaptation to confinement. And when adaptation is complete, escape no longer even occurs to him. But there is a point, often in midlife, when something cracks. A crisis arrives. A divorce filing, an affair, a health scare, or simply the unbearable weight of boredom. At that moment, the man realizes he has lived not as himself, but as a function of a role. In the next section, we will confront this breaking point and the existential crisis that follows through the lens of philosophers like Sartre and Frankl, who understood the terrifying and liberating moment when a man finally sees the bars of his own cage. Every structure, no matter how solid, has a stress limit. So does every man. For years, the weight can be carried, the daily obligations, the quiet self-erasure, the loss of passions. But then something happens. A fracture forms. And once it does, the entire architecture of his life begins to tremble. Sometimes this fracture comes violently. A divorce served without warning, an affair uncovered, a sudden layoff that exposes how fragile his financial security really was. Other times, it arrives with an almost unbearable subtlety. He wakes up one morning and realizes he feels nothing at all. No anger, no joy, no anticipation. Just a dull neutrality toward the life he has built. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote, "Man is condemned to be free, because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does." The breaking point is this condemnation made visible. For years, the man believed his choices were dictated by duty, love, or inevitability. Now, he sees that each compromise, each sacrifice, each submission to the structure was his own decision, and therefore his own responsibility. This realization is not gentle. It burns. It humiliates, because with it comes the awareness that he has been both the prisoner and the jailer. He maintained the very walls he now despises, mistaking them for pillars of virtue. In this moment, many men face a terrifying question. If I am not the husband, the provider, the stable rock, then who am I? The years have erased or neglected the other identities. Artist, adventurer, dreamer, rebel. Stripped of the role, he feels naked before himself. This is where Viktor Frankl's insight becomes crucial. Having endured the unimaginable horrors of concentration camps, Frankl concluded that meaning is not found in comfort, but in the conscious choice to confront suffering. He wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." For the man at the breaking point, this is the pivot. He cannot erase the years spent inside the structure. He cannot undo the compromises already made. But he can decide, perhaps for the first time in decades, to reclaim authorship of his life. This is the seed of liberation. However, there is a trap even here. In the initial surge of awakening, Some men confuse liberation with destruction. They burn down everything: marriage, career, friendships, without understanding what they will build in its place. The danger is that, without deep introspection, they simply exchange one form of confinement for another. A rebound relationship, a reckless lifestyle, a new role just as consuming as the old one. The awakening must be anchored in what Sartre called authentic existence, living in alignment with one's own chosen values, rather than those imposed by society, culture, or unconscious archetypes. This requires brutal honesty. It means asking, do I want this? Or have I simply been told I should want this? It means risking disapproval, misunderstanding, and even loneliness in order to live in truth. The irony is that the breaking point, so feared and avoided, is often the first real opportunity for freedom. It is the moment when the man stops running on inherited scripts and begins to write his own. But it is also a dangerous crossroads. The path toward authenticity requires courage, patience, and a willingness to endure uncertainty. The path back into another form of bondage is always easier and more familiar. What determines the outcome is whether the man can sit in the discomfort of freedom long enough to see that it is worth it. That no matter how unsettling, it is better to be the author of a flawed story than the obedient character in someone else's perfect script. In the final section, we will look at what this conscious path forward can actually look like, not as an abstract ideal, but as a lived reality for men who choose never to enter the institution of marriage, yet still embrace love, connection, and meaning on their own terms. The greatest lie about rejecting marriage is that it means rejecting love. This is the cultural smear designed to keep men in line. If you do not sign the contract, you must be a commitment phobe, a cynic, or a selfish wanderer incapable of deep connection. But the truth is far more subversive and far more liberating. You can love fiercely without legal entanglement. You can build a life with someone, share your home, your bed, your dreams, without surrendering your autonomy to a state-sanctioned framework. You can raise children with devotion and presence without entering into an arrangement that, statistically and structurally, disadvantages you the moment it falters. Choosing not to marry as a man is not a rejection of intimacy. It is a refusal to confuse love with bureaucracy. It is the decision to keep your bonds rooted in choice, not compulsion. When the relationship endures, it does so because both people continue to choose it, not because lawyers and courts have made exit costly and complex. From a Jungian perspective, this choice allows for what he called individuation, the process of becoming the self you were meant to be. In marriage's traditional form, individuation often stalls because the role of husband subsumes other dimensions of the psyche. But outside that framework, you have the space to let the hero, the lover, and the king all express themselves in balance, without one archetype devouring the others. Arthur Schopenhauer once wrote, "It is difficult to find happiness within oneself, but it is impossible to find it anywhere else." This is the heart of the alternative path. You build your life on the foundation of your own wholeness, not on the hope that another person or an institution will complete you. You enter relationships not from need or social pressure, but from abundance and alignment. Practically, this path demands courage. It means facing the discomfort of friends and family questioning your choices. It means resisting the temptation to prove your love through a ceremony designed more for public approval than private truth. It means being vigilant against your own archetypal impulses, the hero who wants to save, the lover who wants to fuse, the king who wants to build an empire, when they push you toward a structure that could quietly consume you. It also means embracing alternative models of connection. You might choose long-term partnership without legal marriage, shared property under separate agreements, or co-parenting arrangements that prioritize the children over the preservation of a failing romance. The specifics matter less than the principle. Every commitment is consciously chosen and consciously maintained, not locked in place by fear of legal or financial ruin. Men who walk this path often discover a paradoxical truth. Without the safety net of marriage, relationships require more presence, not less. You cannot coast on the inertia of vows, you must actively nurture the bond. This creates a dynamic where both partners remain engaged, aware that the continuation of the relationship depends not on law, but on daily acts of connection and respect. And if the relationship ends, it ends cleanly, painfully perhaps, But without the years of legal battles, the confiscation of resources, the state's intrusion into the most intimate parts of your life. You grieve, you heal, you move forward with your identity and autonomy intact. This is not a call for isolation. It is a call for intentionality, for a life where love is not reduced to an economic and legal arrangement, for a manhood defined not by compliance with outdated societal scripts, but by the courage to live in truth, even when that truth contradicts the herd. Carl Jung warned of the danger of living an unlived life. Marriage, as it is currently structured, risks exactly that for men. A slow surrender of the self in exchange for an illusion of security. To reject it is not to reject love. It is to protect the very capacity to love as a free and whole human being. The canyon is still there. The voices still shout, "Jump!" But perhaps you will stand at the edge, look across and smile. Not at what you're refusing, but at the vast, open horizon behind you, waiting to be explored.